This conference will now be recorded.
2021 Board of Commissioners special meeting. Get things started this evening. Could we first have a poll?
Commissioner Walker? Here. Commissioner Seton? Here. Commissioner Kelly?
Here.
Commissioner Morgan?
Here.
And I believe Commissioner Long is running a couple minutes.
All right. Next, if we could please rise and join in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to note that all public sessions of the South Whitehall Township Board of Commissioners are electronically recorded, filed, and posted on board docs for the public's access. At this point, Randy, could you read the guidelines for our virtual meetings?
Sure. All meetings are electronically recorded. Participants' names will not be displayed during the meeting. All participants will be required to mute their microphones when not participating in the dialogue. If a participant would like courtesy of the floor or would like to make public comment or has a question on a specific topic, they must type their name and address into the chat feature. The meeting facilitator will identify and call on the individual requesting to speak. If somebody is participating via phone, there will be an opportunity to ask questions once the individual has unmuted their microphone and identified themselves with name and address. If someone has requested courtesy of the floor prior to the meeting via email, the facilitator will identify and call on the individual who has requested courtesy of the floor. Public comment will be limited to 5 minutes per speaker. These rules have been established to ensure a professional meeting environment.
Thank you, Randy. All right. So this evening for our special meeting, we are here to discuss our ordinance 1058. It's the issuance of our general obligation bond ordinance, motion to decide final amount for the 2021 bonds. So this evening we have Jamie here and Scott. Jamie, welcome.
Hi.
You're doing great, thank you.
Just before we start, I want to give everyone an update on where we stand. Yeah, this is working. Good news. So I want to give everyone an update on where we are with this financing process. I think you might recall when we first worked through the ordinance process and got that approved, the next steps were getting together what is called a preliminary official statement and ultimately getting to a credit rating agency. We have gone through that process. Actually, tomorrow morning, we expect to hear back from Moody's Investor Service. Just as a backdrop, Randy and Scott joined me and some of my colleagues on a call. We prepared a pretty lengthy presentation to give the rating agency a backdrop about the township itself, the type of economic development, things that have happened over the last decade or so within the township, to kind of give them a good idea without kind of seeing the financials. We want to see kind of the bigger picture of what's going on. The rating agency asked lots of questions. We're probably on the call for about an hour or so. They've asked for some feedback. Ultimately, I seem pretty comfortable. I don't have the actual rating in hand, but we hope it will fall within the AA category. We'll see how that all turns out once it's all said and done tomorrow morning. I thought it was a positive phone call. I think Randy and Scott did a great job answering questions. Obviously, there were some things that they asked before their time, but I thought they did a great job kind of explaining what's going on and where we're headed. So keep your fingers crossed. Things go as well as I expect them to go. We'll have a strong rating and allow us to go to the bond market. The expectation is, assuming tonight you decide the final borrowing amount, we would go to start to preliminary price the bonds. Stiefel, the underwriter, would start to talk to some investors starting as early as tomorrow morning. The plan would eventually go out and price the bonds on the 21st. So that's when we would actually lock in the final interest rates. Right now, the market's been pretty stable. We actually sold some bonds today, actually two issues today, Borough of Chambersburg, down in near Harrisburg, and Forest Hill School District, which I think is out west. The market seems a pretty good tone. Hopefully, nothing major changes over the next couple of days, but I suspect we'll kind of fall within the range. And if we get a strong credit rating, we'll do a little better than I expect. So that's kind of the highlights. I think we're in a pretty good place. Let's talk about the new money. So, when we first established the parameters ordinance, we established a maximum principal amount of $15 million. The concept behind that was to give you, the board, flexibility, us, the finance team, flexibility to do the necessary things to get to market and make a determination at a future meeting. Well, that happens to be tonight. That amount would be used for the refinancing of your existing debt, as well as, if necessary, borrowing some additional funds for capital projects. Obviously, tonight, if we get the number, we'll be able to get to the pre-pricing tomorrow morning, and we'll establish the amount necessary for the capital project itself. Really, the major piece of this is really just kind of permanent financing and refinancing. So I think what we've been talking about is ranging between, I think, 500,000 and $1.5 million or so. So we're going to talk about those numbers based on the conversations that you may have. Obviously, at this point, you see the top page. Again, I've talked about the market. We're in a good place right now. Not all-time lows, but in a position where rates are near historic lows at this point. This particular page, which I think is page 3 of the presentation, this is the debt we're going to take out. So again, the most important piece would be the 2019 issue. We're going to permanently finance that. The balance of that debt is about $9 million. The 2014 and 2018 notes were established to refinance existing debt at that time and borrow some additional funds. Partly, utility related, partly general fund. We won't re-amortize the debt and extend anything above what it currently is. So overall, the refinancing portion is going to be somewhere around 12.5, $13 million, give or take, depending on final costs or accrued interest associated with that debt. So what do we have left? Turn to page 4. So this is the baseline conversation. So the idea behind this page is if the board chose not to borrow any additional funds for any capital. So this is just go refinance the existing debt, permanently finance the debt associated with this building. This is the expectation of what the payments would be if you do nothing at all for the additional borrowing that we're going to talk about. So that's why the green column 4 and column 11, shows $0. The expectation is the permanent financing of the building would be about $600,000 per year based on, I think, some relatively conservative rates. Hopefully we're going to do a little bit better than that. That's the baseline, do nothing. The next page. By the way, if you need a hard copy, I do have hard copies. Yeah. I should have asked that first.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Actually, it's page 5, sorry. So this page is the assumption that the township borrows about $500,000 for a capital project. I think the dam is probably a good example of what that money can be used for. It's very generic of what we suggested or showing here. This would amortize over a 20-year period, just like we were showing before. If you were to do that, the incremental amount you pay for that project would be about between $30,000 and $35,000 per year. That's principal and interest. So just to give you an idea, the total interest expense on that $500,000 as an estimate would be about $210,000, to give you an idea. Again, from a budgeted standpoint for that project, it's about $30,000. Nothing else is changing at all on the other assumptions. This is just kind of a snapshot of that project or a project of similar size. Anyone have any questions on this particular page? You can compare this to a future page.
I have a question. I look at this a little differently than what you just said. So let me tell you how I look at it. You can come back to what you just said. So comparing financing 30 million versus 12.5, I looked at the lower right-hand number, which means the total cost is 16.6 versus 15.5, or $700,000. So the bottom right-hand cost difference is $700,000, not the half. Is that equivalent to what you just said?
You're paying principal of about $500,000 and about $200,000 in interest.
All right. Okay.
Throughout the loan. Yes, throughout the course of the financing. So, on average, every year, the budgeted payment would be about $30,000 per year.
Is there a kick-in?
On all these bonds, we'll have a call provision, prepayment penalty. So for the first 8 years, you won't have the ability to refinance unless you put money in an escrow.
Repeat that. The first 8 years.
Yeah, so it has an 8-year call provision. So if you think about it, if you're an investor of these bonds, that means that the portion of the bonds that are outstanding will remain outstanding for 8 years. So in year 7, if the market is better, so let's say the interest rates are lower than they are today, we can go back, consider doing a refinancing after the 7th year. So in year 8,
It's locked.
yeah,
Is that normal?
yes, yeah. The bond issues, they have those type of protections. That said, if you had extra money and you wanted to pay down that, you can put money in an escrow. It just has to sit in that escrow until year 8. So you can pay down, it's not very efficient. You're just putting money in.
Put the money in this. But it does not change the principal amount.
It would reduce it from a legal standpoint, from a tax standpoint, so you would have a lower payment, just would not be as efficient if you, let's say a year after this bond sold, you said, hey, I'm not gonna spend this. We can put $500,000 into an account and it would pay down. It would be earning, less than what you're paying on the yield, so it would cost you a couple dollars. Yeah, that does happen sometimes, like as an example, I've had schools that borrow, $30 million and the bids came back, $2 million less, and so that we don't have any other capital. You can always escrow and pay down. We'll have a little bit of it. Yes, yeah, I can't tell you what the answer will be until you actually get to that point, because maybe in 5 years, interest rates are higher and the escrow would be more efficient because you can earn more, as an example.
I have a question along those lines as well. So what we're doing today is refinancing a loan, 2 loans, one of 3, but one from 14 and one from 18. So a 3-year loan and a 7-year loan. So we were in a bond situation now and wanted to refinance because we needed another project funded, another building renovation, for example. What would that mean would we be able to refinance today those loans, wrap it up and do a new, refinance into a new bond?
It depends.
Down the road.
Yeah, you can, yes, because the bonds have a call provision on them.
But within the first 8 years, I'm saying, we're not in the 8 years yet. So what if we were in the same situation 45 years from now? A large project comes up with $10 million that we need to fund, and we wanted to take our new bond, roll in a $10 million debt. What position would we be in to do that?
You just borrow $10 million and just,
Couldn't roll this over.
you could if you wanted, if there was an economic benefit to it.
Thank you.
Yeah, you can, but we would obviously do the analysis to figure out if you made any. So that's, again, baseline number 2 is you borrow about $500,000 for projects, and that's what the payments would be to kind of cover that. The third option is this gets you a total of a $15 million of proceeds. So it gives you kind of a third alternative. This is on page 6. So the main difference here, this is just kind of picked out of the air, but this gives you an idea that you would end up with about $2.4 million worth of money for capital projects. So the idea is, well, rates are really low now. We've got a capital improvement plan. We think we would want to fund, instead of using our own reserves for that, we can borrow the funds for that particular project. So in that case, instead of the payment being about $30,000, it would be about $155,000. kind of, I think that's like the worst case scenario. If you borrowed the full amount, and you ended up with $2.4 million worth of money for capital projects, it would cost you about $150,000. As far as interest associated with that, full 2.4, you'd pay about $979,000 total interest.
So let me make the same point. So if you look at the bottom right hand, option 3, 19 million, compared with the bottom right hand number for option 1, which is 15.9, that's what, 3.1 million?
Yep, it would cost you 3.1 million for total principal and interest. That's correct.
So we're going to pay 3.1 million to get this incremental 2.4 million, which, as you said, is, we'll pay $700,000 in interest.
900,000.
9, sorry.
Yeah, it's a great, I mean, there's a philosophical discussion that you can have is, would you rather use proceeds to issue debt that goes long-term, stuff you're going to do bridges and roads that have long-term useful lives? Would you rather use that versus using your own capital, your own money?
Which is interest free,
Yes,
right?
that's right. Yep.
Right.
Yeah,
Because there's been a lot said about, oh boy, we gotta take this extra money because it only costs this low,
1.5%.
low interest rate. But the money available to us, which I'll explain in a minute, is interest free. Right. And we have a sizable number of funds available to us, interest free.
Two things you want to consider, I guess we'll find this out, tomorrow, based on the credit rating you have, we'll find it out. One thing you want to do is maintain strong fund balances, because that is a major criteria when looking at your credit rating. So obviously, we're going to establish a baseline of what that credit rating will be. I hope it comes in this AA category. I've certainly had conversations with clients about what's an adequate amount of fund balance to have. I believe, Scott, I think you guys have put together or about to put together a fund balance policy. You're establishing a certain amount of fund balance that you're going to maintain going forward. I believe the number is 20%. As far as, an action item, that's typically what GFOA kind of suggests is having at least that amount. I have some clients that have 50%, I have some that have 8%. Usually what happens in this market, if you have a strong amount of reserves, it'll put you in a better position for a credit rating. Ultimately, that what does is it gives you potentially lower interest rates for any future borrowing. So it is a delicate balance of having strong reserves, strong demographics, that gets you to a position where you feel comfortable both in case there was an emergency, one, and two, if you ever want to borrow debt in the future.
So let's earmark this point. I'm gonna come back to it later. I won't go into it immediately, but I'll come back to it later.
Care to share, gentlemen? Excuse me? Care to share? Anything worth sharing?
No. I think it's time.
Good.
I don't have any other numbers because I want to give you some baselines to get you started. One thing I will point out, for every $1 million that you add or subtract, from a payment standpoint, it's about $70,000 per year payment. So it kind of gives you an idea. So you said that $2.4 million, and I said I only wanted 1.4, knock off about $70,000 off that annual payment. It gives you an idea of what the budget payment would be.
What's the time frame that if you, whatever amount you would end up taking, you have to use that in
You have to reasonably expect to spend the money within 3 years.
3 years?
Is that 85%?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We try to say spend 100, like from an IRS standpoint, you're supposed to spend 85%. It doesn't mean that, that if you don't spend it by 85, the full 85%, they're going to come, knock on your door, blocking you up. But you have to kind of consider that when you're borrowing. Because what the IRS doesn't want you to do is go out and borrow too much money and then never spend it. Because if you think about it, you're borrowing at tax-free interest rates, and the IRS is giving you a benefit for being tax-free. So I don't want you to overborrow and take advantage of the fact that it is tax-free. Because you can invest at a taxable interest rate. Now, these days, you're not really earning very much on your money anyway, but over the course of a 3-year period, it's possible that interest rates can go up on the short term. That's why the IRS kind of wants you to work through those avenues, and that's how they suggest you do it.
So for a scenario like, say we would consider doing like the 13, to cover, for instance, what we anticipate might be Ware's Dam. Say something happens and Ware's Dam, we can't, I don't anticipate this is going to happen, it does though, we can't start the work. Now we have that extra money. Can you use that for a different capital project? Okay, so we're not tied to that particular one, but we internally might be earmarking it for ourselves for that project.
Yeah, and the background behind that is you establish the ordinance that leaves it somewhat open-ended for certain projects. So you could always go back and do a change of purpose ordinance, or essentially legally changes the purpose from one to the other. So I've had clients that say, oh, we're definitely doing a baseball field. And then they decide not to do baseball fields, and then they change it to use it for roads. So,
I think of it, well, I'm thinking of the scenario, for instance, of Ware's Dam, like, because that's driven strongly by DEP and permits. If something would get hung up, I don't anticipate for 3 years it would get hung up, but if it did, I mean, unheard of, we would still be able to utilize that money for an alternate capital project if we needed.
yep, the board, it's at the board's discretion. I mean, it's your money. In the end, you're paying interest on that money. So that's why you want to be deliberate about how much you want to borrow. You want to over borrow, I wouldn't want to under borrow either, because in the end, it takes a lot of time and effort and cost to kind of go through a financing. So, being diligent about deciding what you want to borrow is key.
Jamie, what would be the cost of one financing ballpark?
Well, if we're doing $1 million, as an example, I wouldn't do a bond issue for $1 million. You'd probably go do a bank. So that's probably 40 grand, cost of issuance. And then you have whatever the interest rate is at the time.
And what is the cost to do this one?
In total, we're just estimating right now. I think the total cost of this one, let's say about 150.
Does that number change?
Yeah, that number changes based on subdivisions.
Okay.
What's that number for again?
You should ask what the cost is. So soft costs on the bond issue, given the size of this transaction, is probably about
Okay.
But that's not the total cost of, isn't that all we're paying for this bond, for everything?
But the cost of issuance, yeah,
Everything.
It's about 1%.
yeah. Give or take.
1%.
About 1%.
Just to get the.
Yeah, just to get everything done, paying the rating agency, paying our fees, paying the underwriters, paying for all the things that are necessary.
We're to finance. If we were to finance 2.5. What additional cost do they need for that? 100,000.
If you're doing another loan, it costs you about $40,000. Yeah, I mean, doing the work for a loan is about the same whether you're doing a $100,000 loan or a $10 million loan. It's the same kind of, you still have the ordinances and the legal opinions. Now, we probably would do a loan of that size, my guess.
So as at the township, just not sure who would even know the answer to the question on the spot, but we took a $9 million anticipation note on the building at the end of 2019. So I'm assuming we spent some funding to then secure that first loan.
Mhm.
That,
Yes.
so whatever amount that was, plus we paid all the interest-only payments for the last 2 years also. So those expenses are not being recouped in this loan, is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, we're amortizing. We're
The
paying
$9
back the
million,
principal.
but what we paid as a township for that original loan, the legal behind it, like said, ordinances and whatnot, and all the interest payments we've made, we didn't touch the principal of that loan.
No, this was a balloon payment, this particular short-term loan.
Right. So
The other one's that. Principal.
the numbers that I'm talking about leading up to this point have all come out of our general fund, is that correct?
It depends. A portion of the 2018 refunding is through the water fund. So like the 2014 and the 2018, there's a portion of that payment that's made by the water fund. The 2019, the interest payments have been out of the general fund. Those can't be, you can't pay, like, the majority of that cash is in the capital projects fund, but you can't pay a loan's interest amount from the capital projects fund. That's stipulated in the bond, like in the note documentation. So that principal payment is, or that interest payment, sorry, is the general fund.
Thank you.
And that's because the purposes of what the original purpose is.
Thank you.
That would be the same way here too. I mean, you're going to allocate a certain amount, covers a portion of the debt on the water fund and some general fund. Yeah, I mean, I would say from the planning standpoint, where we are today, just given kind of getting to the point where we've got the financials in order, time the project got done, locking in a rate at the interest rates we have, I think it's going to work out pretty well for the township. And, I think it was the right move because of just where we were at the time.
Yeah. So Jamie, you sort of said it. Is it fair to say that this discussion and this vote, which we'll take in the next half hour, philosophically, it's the difference between being financially conservative and only taking the 12.5 million or versus taking the 15 million because it's available and the interest rate's low, regardless of how much money you have for capital projects that might be proposed in the future.
It's a question of what kind of projects do you want to spend the money on? If you have a capital improvement plan and you want to spend money using your capital reserve, that's fine. If you want to borrow the funds, that's fine too. I mean, this is a question for you guys. I mean, I don't really care one way or the other. I mean, in the end, I think it makes sense to at least amortize some of this because some of these projects have useful lives over 20 years. You usually want to amortize debt for the period of how long it's going to be out there for. But if you want to reduce interest expense, don't borrow the extra money.
Yeah. Let me give you a few thoughts from the financially conservative standpoint. I've said before at these meetings, as my co-commissioner, Ian Kelly, we like to have information. We like to have financial information in order to make financial decisions. There's been times in the past we found it very difficult to do so. So here's some reasons to take the financially conservative approach. We do not have a long-term spending plan. We have advocated producing like a long-term 5-year spending plan. So we're not just managing budget to budget, but this township hasn't done that yet. As we sit here tonight, we have budget workshops in progress. We do not have the 2022 budget, even the first draft of it in front of us. So we don't know what that is from a revenue standpoint or from an expenditure standpoint. Work has been in progress under Randy and the staff to come up with a list of proposed capital projects. We've got a timing issue because the designated time to do that is tomorrow. And I don't think it would be very meaningful to present that information tonight because that's all it would be. A presentation, it would be unapproved, unreviewed, and it would not be approved yet. Furthermore, our 2020 audit is still not complete. It's coming, it's about a week away, but it's not complete. Good work's been done on the fund balance policy, and it's promising, but it's not complete either. So those are basic reasons. If you were to take the financial conservative route, those are basic reasons to do so. On the revenue and the capital available side is the point I said I would come back to. So we have other monies. we have the ARPA one. Scott, correct me if I'm wrong on any of these numbers. That's $2.1 million to be spent over the next 2 years. Right? And the other thing we talked about, the auditor has motivated us to do this, and you just mentioned it. We have the unassigned general fund balance. At the end of 2019, it was $5.6 million. The draft 2020 audit report indicates that it's $7.8 million. Now, again, we haven't reviewed that, but it appears as if it increased from 19 to 20 by $2.2 million. And it increased from 35% to 48%. Right? Now, our auditor has recommended that we can draw that down and use it for capital projects. We could draw it down to still a conservative 30%, right? And that would free up, I think, $3 million. Put that all together. Between the ARPA money and drawing down the fund balance from its current 7.8 down to 4.8, we have $5 million to spend on capital projects, which again are currently unspecified. All right. So if you're a conservative, you would use that $5 million and not take an extra $1.6 million. I don't see a reason why you would take an extra $1.6 million for currently unspecified projects that this board just hasn't approved yet. I'll pause there. I have a whole other set of reasons why I'm comfortable taking more than the 12.5. I'll just pause here and see if there's any comments about what I said.
Just my only comment would be, I don't, can you clarify what you mean by conservative?
We talk about financial accountability, okay? If you want to exercise financial accountability and translate it from a very generic term into exactly what's going on here, if you're conservative, you manage your expenditures, you have very thoughtful review of the projects you approve, and you try to do that using as little as possible. So in this case, to be financially conservative, one would tap into the 5 million and not take the extra 1.6 million. As I said, you might have missed this on the other night, okay? The other night I said, how many capital projects do we need to run here? Right? We got $5 million. Randy can come up with a list. We can go through it. We can decide whether we're doing it or not. Do we really need $6.6 million of capital projects versus 5 million? That's just in this sense, that's what being fiscally conservative would be.
So if I understand you correctly, Commissioner Walker, you're saying that you would be satisfied with the $12.9 million?
I would be for the reasons I've given and for some additional reasons I've yet to share with you.
But the answer is
yes.
Thank you. All right. So the one thing that I have an issue with is there was a referendum made to actually borrow $600,000 towards various things. This to me right now is an opportunity to borrow those funds. So we have low interest rates, we have one payment that we incorporate that into it. Yes, we do have some $200,000 in reserve in the case that the cost of the improvement is going to be over and above $600,000. The referendum clearly was for $600,000, not a penny less. I would recommend the 12.5 plus the 600,000.
Commissioner Sutton, thank you for bringing up the WERS dam issue. I actually looked up I was doing a Google search today just to get some history. It looks like the day after the election where the majority of the voters in South Whitehall voted to consider taking out debt. So the board meeting the next day, then Commissioner Mulqueen stated if the township can avoid borrowing money and potentially raising taxes, he said that will be a priority. They said that they were budgeting $50,000 toward the work and that the township might pursue grants to pay for the work and look to the nonprofit Friends of the Dam for fundraising. We are keenly aware of the budget and we're cautious in how we spend money. At the very end, the article, which was written by Sarah Wojcik from the Morning Call, states, if the township chooses to pursue a $6,000 loan, they would take it out over a 5-year period at a roughly 4% interest rate, which would put the debt payment at $132. But the impetus of this article, it seemed like the desire of the board at that time was to try to avoid borrowing, and multiple times it was mentioned here that they would pay it back over a 5-year period. I found that interesting, because it seems like we've kind of swayed from that. That was almost 5 years ago to the day, and I know we put $50,000 away every year up to last year, so we've got $200,000 so far. To Commissioner Walt's point, that we've got money in our reserve fund and in our general fund that we could use for capital projects. It certainly makes sense if we're looking at only a $400,000 addition to do that project. Funding is certainly there. But I'll wrap that up just to go back to Jamie. Twice in your presentation today, you said you have a capital improvement plan you want to fund. We don't have one. At least I, as a commissioner for 2 years now, I've never seen one. I've never seen a full plan for each department, and this is what we need. This is the real estate taxes and whatever other revenue we will need to get to this place. What is our plan to take care of our infrastructure and our maintenance with our current budget, with our emphasis on the needs, and then putting the special projects, capital improvements and whatnot in a different category. We haven't, as a board, seen the 2020 budget at all. We've had no input whatsoever as individual commissioners or as a joint board into the drafting of it, the focus of it, the vision of it, where the capital needs are. We haven't had that discussion at all. And I say that to say it's unfortunate. I understand the interest rates are low right now, but if we're going to consider taking on debt, that shouldn't be part of our revenue stream. Since we haven't identified the needs at this point before tonight. You were here last in August. We've not, as a board, discussed capital projects. We haven't discussed this issue since the last time you were there, and it's very unfortunate. So I just want to make that comment for.
I'd like to elaborate on that because it goes to the other comments I said I would make. So I've been a commissioner for 21 months, so I know enough to be dangerous, as I said, right? Commissioner Kelly and I have been assigned to the Finance Committee, so we've got an opportunity to understand this in a little bit more depth. But if I take a step back and I look at how this board has managed Whitehall Township finances, what I'm about to say, I believe, are just facts, all right? And then I'll tell you my conclusion from the facts. If we go back over the past several years, from 2014 to 2019, our taxes doubled. They increased 100%. In 2014, at the same time the tax increases started, we took this loan That's the first loan on your list for $1.4 million. And it was used for a variety of things, maybe a couple of capital projects, but it was also used for ongoing expenditures. Then in 2018, we did the same thing. We took a loan for $1.8 million to pay for a few capital projects, but ongoing expenditures, including things like maintenance. And in 2019, we took $9.3 million for the campus renovation. During this entire period, from 2020 to 2020, we raised taxes, we borrowed all that money, and we did not have enough of it done for 10 years. Right? That's where I say being financially conservative is knowing where your finances are, having audited reports without having to borrow this large amount of money. At the same time, there are a lot of fund transfers going on. Try to keep up on a daily basis of, this money was transferred from here to here for a variety of reasons. And honestly, it's very difficult to tell whether we have a cash flow problem or whether we have a spending problem. We need to look at those cash transfers further. Now, as I've said, and Commissioner Kelly has said, we don't have a long-term spending plan, but here's what we do have. We have a history of tax increases, borrowing and spending. 2014, let's borrow and spend. 2018, let's borrow and spend. 2021, let's borrow and spend. What are we going to do? Every 4 years, we're going to borrow another $1.5 million. I think this board needs to take accountability for the township finances, get everything in order, like Scott described at the last board meeting, before we continue to take additional financing on projects that we don't have a long-term plan. And we haven't even looked at a proposed list for the next year. That's what financial conservatism is. That's what financial accountability is. That's what I am. We have some other candidates in the audience here who are running on financial accountability. That's what it is in this case.
I would rephrase it to financial responsibility. Again, the $600,000 was a referendum by the people of South Whitehall Township to take care of the renovations of the Ridge Act. A referendum by the people of South Whitehall Township. We're approaching it, probably in the spring, it's going to come. It is a financial responsibility to borrow that money and to make sure that the funds are there day one when we want to start.
I just have a quick comment on that. You see there's these two words that keep coming up. They come up relative to the 15 million. They come up relative to the where's damn $600,000. Quote unquote, the two words are up to. The voters approved a referendum to borrow up to $600,000. Now, up to means anywhere from $0 to $600,000. And if we have a surplus of funding that could be used for Where's Dam, that's untapped, then we could borrow nothing and satisfy the voter referendum.
I just want to reiterate, maybe to clear this up again, former Commissioner Matthew Mulqueen, who was on the board at the time, I will quote his statement that was made the day after the referendum. If the township can avoid borrowing money and potentially raising taxes, he said that will be his priority. We're borrowing money, and for 20 years, we would be taking the debt out for the dam. And if you're comfortable saying that you don't intend that taxes will raise to pay for this debt over the 20 years, that would be one thing. But if we've got $400,000 in a reserve fund that we can spend, which obviously we do, we've got over $5 million in one fund, and we have $2.1 million of ARPA funds, which are the American Rescue Plan funds. We certainly can take care of this project without borrowing and making additional costs to it based on the cost of the loan and the interest. So it's just a matter of, do we want to make this project cost more because of interest fees, or do we want to use the money we have on hand and pay for it and move forward? It's obviously a project that is earmarked to be done, and it's a question of, are we borrowing the money to do it, or will we take the funds that are readily available, set aside for projects to do so? So I guess that's the question.
Yeah, so first, with all due respect to the morning call, I'm not sure that supporting them is absolutely the ultimate. I will say that again. It was the people of South Whitehall Township that agreed in a referendum to borrow and go into debt of up to $600,000. Again, if we have money that we can return and put it back into the bond, we can do that. There's not going to be a penalty. It's not going to escrow as it was presented earlier. Meanwhile, if I'm understanding it correctly, the improvements to the rear stand is probably going to start taking place in spring. We want to make sure that on day one, we don't have to sit here again and allocate money from one account. The rear stand, this money is going to be allocated, stay for the rear stand, and that's how I feel it should be. So I'm all for the 12.5 plus the 600.
I just have two quick comments, Joe.
Just for clarity's sake, I think it's important to mention this. I agree, we don't necessarily have a formalized capital plan in place, but to say that we've never been discussing or heard of any capital projects that need to be considered for the future, I think is not a true statement. I know we've been provided a lot of information about potential projects coming down the pipe that need consideration. I will say the total 15 million, I would tend to agree. I'm not sure that makes sense at this point. We don't have enough information to make that decision right now. But, I would say that, the Wares Dam project, we agreed to go into debt up to $600,000, up to. We don't know exactly what that's going to cost. It's not going to cost less, likely. Likely it would cost more. And with the information we have in front of us, understanding the interest rates and the amount of work that went into this, it makes sense to include that additional amount. And if something would happen with Wares Dam that we couldn't work on that project within the 3 years, there is certainly enough projects in this alone that was presented to us at the last meeting, at our last budget workshop meeting, that would cover that additional monies. So I just wanted to clarify that fact. I think staff has done an extremely good job at providing us some details on the capital projects that are needed within the community over the next 5 to 10 years. Is it a formalized plan right now? Not necessarily. Is it something we need to work on? Absolutely. But to say we have no idea what they are or the potential costs, I think is untrue. So I think we, to some degree, I agree with you, Commissioner Walk, we need some more details, absolutely. So 15 probably isn't that right number. But I think possibly a number slightly above that, 12.5, to cover one project which we know is coming in front of us and has been the desire of this community. To include that makes sense and makes us forward thinkers. We need to consider those additional costs. Yes, we have ARPA money. We don't know exactly what that ARPA money is going to have to go towards. We're going to have additional costs with ARPA money potentially to upgrade our sound systems and systems to use here for virtual meetings. Who knows? We're not even sure of that. So I think we need to consider all those things and be a little bit forward thinking with this as we make a final decision, which we're going to have to do here in the next 10 minutes.
Yeah.
So I want to give everybody a chance to have a comment or thought. Commissioner Stetton, you spoke at length. Commissioner Long, did you have anything else you wanted to add? Thoughts, ideas?
No, just real quick to reiterate your point, Commissioner Morgan, I do disagree with the fact that we haven't had opportunity for input on the 2022 budget, as well as being presented information. I think we've gotten plenty of information. I think it's an unfair statement to the staff to make. With regards to your comment, Commissioners, I agree with what you said is conservative, and some of what you said is conservative I don't agree with, but I do believe overall, I think this has much more to do with our philosophical belief in whether or not we want to spend down reserves if that time comes, or whether or not we want to have money available to us. And I would be able to believe that we should have more money available to us than not if needed. And I don't believe that doesn't mean make me any less of a conservative than you. That's your opinion. That's not a fact.
I have a comment about Commissioner Long's comment. Here we go with the old chestnut. Every comment we make is a criticism of staff. That's not true. We respect and we trust staff, and we tell you in these meetings, and we tell you at the budget meetings. Her, for one, sitting here, has done a fantastic job presenting his proposed budget and providing it in detail. And you can see the amount of thought that he's given to it. So this notion that anything we say is a criticism of staff is not true, and it's a pretty weak argument to put forward.
All right, I would just add that we have not been given a draft copy of the 2022 budget.
We've had 2 out of 4 budget workshops.
We have not been given a budget.
So we as a board need to make some decisions tonight on the amount of monies we'd like to move forward with for the bond issuance.
I would like to make a motion if I may.
Very long.
I'd like to make a motion to borrow the amount of $13 million, .1. That would be $12.5 million to cover our debt, an additional $600,000 for the raise net.
I'll second that.
So we have a motion and a second on the floor. Are there any questions, comments?
I have a question as a point of clarity. If I'm reading the information from Jamie from PFM correctly, the actual funding amount without anything being added would be $12,579,896. So my question is, the motion made by Commissioner Stetton and seconded. Is it 600,000 on top of that number, or the rounded 2.5 million?
It would be 600,000 on top.
Can I want to make one clarification. The way we're showing this is how much proceeds you're going to get once it's all said and done. The actual principal amount, depending on the day of pricing, may move a little bit depending on if it's a discount bond, a premium bond. I would suggest if you're going to make a motion for the amount of money for the project fund, and that's how much we'll add to the borrowing. So if you're saying you want $600,000 for projects, I think that would be the best way to do it for clarity purposes. Because we already know how much we're going to pay for the refinancings and any costs, because we can back into how much you need for projects. Just for clarity purposes, I think using 600 or 500 or 0, that's what we should be making a motion to. That would make it easier for me to kind of budget that for purposes of.
Rather than that, the raise down.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll change my motion. My motion would be to make this, get a bond for 12,500,000, I'm sorry. In addition to the debt of 12,570,000, what was it? I'm not sure.
For point of clarity, I believe the motion would need to be withdrawn. Is that not right, Attorney Rader?
That would make sense, yes.
You need to withdraw your initial motion and then restate your motion.
Okay. I'll withdraw my original motion. And my new motion to be $579,000 in addition to that, another $600,000 for capital improvements.
Second that as well.
So we would have to open this up for any other further questions from the public. Correct?
Yes, ma'am.
So are there any questions from the public? You in the Zoom?
Nothing in the chat.
So we have a motion on the floor for the, on the same amount motion. 12, is it 12.5?
Well, 570.
12,579 with an additional 600,000 for capital improvement project. Motion on the floor from Commissioner Seton. We have a second from Commissioner Long. Can I have a roll call vote, please, Randy?
Commissioner Walk, for clarity, I fully support the Where's Dan project and don't want any discussion about financing to indicate otherwise. I'll stand on principle and vote no regarding putting that financing into this bond.
Commissioner Long,
Yes.
Commissioner Seton,
Yes, and just to clarify, my vote was for the vote of the people for the resident.
and Commissioner Kelly.
No, I will not support this. I do support the 12.5 million to refinance our debt. And the Where's Dam monies, we have $200,000 already set aside, and we have almost $6 million in our capital fund to use to finish funding that project. I do not agree to go into further debt, and that we should just pay this off next year.
And Commissioner Morgan.
I vote yes for the reasons I stated before and the fact that at length we discussed our responsibility to create a fiscal stability fund and look into the future and be planning into the future. And I think this is a part of it. So, that being said, motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie, for all of your work. And yes, our thanks to Kevin and the other colleagues. Megan.
We'll have good news tomorrow. I'm sure Scott will report back once everything's official on the grading, and we'll have the final numbers done on the 21st. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jamie.
Right.
Thank you, Scott, and Scott, everybody. All right, so we have opportunity for courtesy of the floor. This is on any non-agenda item. Any? No executive session. We do need a motion to adjourn from the special meeting. A motion on the floor from Commissioner Kelly. Over a second. Second from Commissioner Seton. All in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. We're going to take a 5-minute break to allow the board to just take a little